Before deciding what topic I wish to complete for my digital history project, I wanted to research popular topics related to female Indigenous struggles throughout history. My reasoning was in hopes of finding a topic that not only spiked my interest, but also to find an issue that I felt as though my own personal research could contribute to solving, or at the very least, communicate and spread more awareness about. Throughout my research, I had come across the term double burden, and I had quickly come to realize that many, if not all, female Indigenous struggles throughout history could be tied back to this term. The term double burden is used to describe the two ways in which Indigenous women are discriminated against. The first is due to their gender, and the second is for being Indigenous. For my project, I want to examine every aspect of the double burden, from its definition, to its history and origins, to modern-day examples, and the ways in which Indigenous women have been fighting to escape the hold that the double burden has over them. While undergoing research for this assignment, I had initially intended on discussing a specific aspect of my research for this digital storytelling assignment. However, upon reading the personal accounts of Indigenous female discrimination, court cases, lectures, and stories, I found myself being moved and inspired in ways that I had never felt before in any other class. And this inspiration has led me to take on a different approach for my digital story, mainly my journey to understanding the topic of the double burden. When studying history, it's sometimes easy to become emotionally detached from historical events, as they occurred so long ago. However, while completing my research, I found that the sources I turned to grasped me both emotionally and intellectually, as Indigenous sources so often do. I came across court cases such as that involving Judge Frank Barakat, who displayed obvious discrimination against a First Nations woman during a custody debate. I was appalled by one of the judge's comments when he stated that life on the reserve with the children's mother would leave them brainwashed away from the real world into a childlike myth of powwows and rituals. This judge tried to award full custody to the non-Aboriginal father, who had 6 prior convictions for assault, clearly displaying bias against the Indigenous mother and providing a modern example of the double burden. Reading about this court case, among several others, greatly upset me. I was shocked to find out how this level of discrimination was still experienced by Indigenous women in the 21st century. Aside from court cases that displayed double burden discrimination, I felt particularly moved by visual lectures that were given by Indigenous women. There's something exceptionally touching about watching and listening to an Indigenous woman tell about her personal and cultural struggles that you just won't find in a history textbook. In online lectures such as Decolonizing Knowledge from Dr. Linda Tawa Smith and Dismantling the White Man's Indian from Dr. Don Martins Hill, I was able to experience a personal and emotional connection with their stories in a way that I've never before experienced in a class or project. These women relayed their struggles of discrimination, but also brought about ideas of hope and change for the women of their culture. It was through watching these lectures that my outlook on this project went from purely academic in nature to also being emotionally driven as well. Once I started approaching this assignment from an emotional standpoint, I found that looking for dates, names, and places became of lesser value than searching for personal stories and experiences from Indigenous women who face discrimination based on their gender and culture. I also found that through studying Indigenous history from an individual or personal angle, that it opened a lot of doors into examining the past that I may have never before considered. Articles such as David Smith's The Squaw Drudge, A Prime Index of Savagism, examines the ways in which Indigenous women have been deemed savages by Europeans, and how this in turn has been used as a means for justifying colonialism and discrimination. Then, through finding more recent accounts of Indigenous discrimination, we are able to compare this and see the ways in which history has come to affect the present through more recent personal narratives. An example of how my emotional connection with this topic influenced my research for this project was in the ways in which I started looking for the voices of Indigenous women who have been silenced for far too long. As discussed in Dr. Linda Smith's lecture on Decolonizing Knowledge, she emphasizes the importance of not simply collecting data, but sharing that knowledge with others. A large component of this assignment is to share the information and knowledge we gather about the Indigenous culture with others in a visual or audio format. I felt motivated to share both the history of the double burden and personal stories through the very women who have been affected by the burden. I had initially intended to examine the history of the double burden from its roots in colonialism up to the 21st century with more modern examples of how Indigenous women face discrimination. However, I believe that through sharing my journey of researching and understanding the double burden, that this information is still conveyed but a deeper level of emotion is also shared. I would also like to take this time to share the names of Indigenous female-run organizations that are currently working to fight for equal gender rights as well as Indigenous rights. Some of these groups are the Aboriginal Women's Action Network, the Feminist Alliance for International Action, the Native Women's Association of Canada, Amnesty International, I Don't Know More, and Ontario Native Women's Association.